The sitting room had always been my quiet refuge, a small, sunlit space where thoughts lingered longer than conversations. But today, it felt different. Every clock tick pressed louder into my chest, every breath seemed to ask a question I wasn't ready to answer. Armin was coming over. Again that we met 2 years ago, at a friend's housewarming, both of us caught between laughter and loneliness. Armin had this calmness that wrapped around his words like a soft coat. He never spoke loudly, but somehow, every sentence he said seemed to stay. Since then, we'd built a friendship that had slowly blurred at the edges, a closeness neither of us named, though both of us felt my name is denial, and I've always believed in clarity, in work, in relationships, in life. But with Armin, clarity dissolved into something softer, more uncertain. He wasn't just a friend, he was a mirror reflecting a version of me that I rarely let others see, gentle, curious, longing. And perhaps that's why the anticipation today felt heavier than usual. My partner, Samir, had left early that morning for a business trip. His messages were polite, predictable, like the rhythm of a life already decided. We had built a house together but not much of a home. The silence between us had grown familiar, comfortable even, like the gap between two chairs that no one bothers to move closer. Armin knew about Samir. He always respected those boundaries, or at least, he said he did. Still, every time he came over, something unspoken floated between us, fragile yet undeniable. A look that lingered a second too long, a laugh that hid too many meanings. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't entirely right either. The clock struck 3. I glanced at the mirror across the room, adjusting the collar of my shirt though I'd already done it twice. Why was I nervous? He'd been here countless times. We'd talked about everything, from movies to politics to memories of people who once made us feel seen. But lately, our conversations had changed. They'd grown quieter, heavier, threaded with pauses that said more than words could manage. When Armin finally knocked, the sound was light, yet it sent a ripple through me. I opened the door to find him smiling, that same half-smile that seemed both shy and sure. He carried a book in one hand and a small box in the other. You said you liked old poetry, he said, holding out the book. I found this at a second-hand shop. Thought of you. I smiled, perhaps too warmly. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he replied simply, and that was the problem. He always wanted to. We sat opposite each other, tea between us, sunlight falling lazily across the floor. The air felt charged with something invisible, like a storm waiting for the first drop. He talked about his work, his new apartment, the people he met. I listened, but my mind kept wandering, to the way he looked when he spoke, to the way his voice softened when he said my name. At one point, he grew quiet. You seem distant today, he said. That I hesitated. Just thinking. About Samir? Maybe, I said. Or maybe about things I shouldn't think about. Armin looked at me for a long time, the kind of look that breaks through pretenses. Sometimes, he said softly, the things we shouldn't think about are the ones that tell us who we really are. His words hung between us like sunlight caught in dust, visible, fleeting, impossible to hold. That I wanted to change the subject, but instead, I smiled faintly. You always know what to say. He laughed quietly. Not always. But with you, maybe I try harder. The room went still again. Outside, the city murmured, a reminder that life moved on, unaware of the quiet storms people carried in their hearts. And as he leaned back, flipping through the pages of the book he'd brought, I knew today would not be like the others. Something within me had shifted, subtle, irreversible, whatever something special meant, I wasn't sure yet. But I knew this much: by the time the sun set, the balance between friendship and something deeper would no longer feel safe. That night, the sitting room no longer felt like my refuge. It felt like a witness, a quiet observer of something fragile that had begun to fracture inside me. The teacups were still on the table, half-finished, as if they, too, had been caught mid-thought. The poetry book lay open beside me, its spine curved where Armin's fingers had pressed. That I ran my hand over the page he had left me with. The verse spoke of truths whispered in silence, and the courage it takes to listen. The words hit deeper now. Samir called just after midnight. His voice was distant, wrapped in the hum of an airport terminal. "Everything okay there?" he asked. "Yes," I said automatically. The lie came too easily. It wasn't about betrayal in the usual sense, it was about a heart that had begun to drift towards someone who saw it more clearly. "Everything's fine." He told me he'd be home by the weekend, that we should go out for dinner, that maybe things would feel lighter once his workload eased. I agreed to all of it, though my chest felt tight. We had built a rhythm, Samir and I, a partnership of plans and politeness. But love, I realized, was not a rhythm. It was a pulse, and ours had faded into something that barely beat anymore. When the call ended, I didn't move for a long time. The stillness pressed down like a weight, forcing me to face what I'd spent months avoiding, that the problem wasn't Armin's presence, it was my own silence. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, soft and hesitant, as if unsure it belonged here anymore. I found myself walking to the small park at the end of the street, the place where Armin and I had first spoken about poetry, where friendship had first begun to tilt into something unnamed. The bench was empty, the same one we had sat on countless times. I sat down, feeling the familiar coolness of the metal beneath my hands. For the first time in weeks, I let the quiet stretch without fighting it. Every friendship has a point where it either deepens into something honest or collapses under what's unspoken. I knew which side of that line I stood on now. I wasn't angry with Armin. I wasn't even ashamed. What frightened me most was how right it had felt to be seen by him, and how wrong it was to pretend it meant nothing. That by evening, I had made my decision. I called Armin. He answered after the second ring, his tone careful, almost unreadable. "Denial?" "I've been thinking," I said. "About yesterday. About everything." He was quiet. Then, softly, "So have I. I don't know what happens next," I continued. "But I do know this, I can't keep living between two truths. It isn't fair to you. Or to Samir." There was a long pause on the line. Then Armin said, "Honesty doesn't always save us. But it keeps us human." I smiled faintly. "That's what I'm hoping for." "I don't want to lose you," he said. "You won't," I replied. "But maybe, for now, we both need space to remember who we were before we became complicated." He sighed, not in anger, but in understanding. "Take care of yourself, Denial. You too." When the call ended, I didn't cry. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, like the quiet after a storm. The ache didn't vanish, but it softened, shaped now by clarity rather than confusion. Later that night, I wrote a note in the back of the poetry book. Just a few lines. Sometimes love doesn't ask to be returned. It asks to be understood. And sometimes, the most faithful thing we can do, is to let go before we lose ourselves. I left the book on the table, where the light from the lamp could touch it. When Samir returned that weekend, I planned to tell him everything, not to hurt him, but to be free from the weight of silence. The sitting room looked the same as always, but it no longer felt like a hiding place. It had become something else, a quiet stage where truth had finally been spoken, even if only to myself. Outside, the night was deep and still. Somewhere in the city, Armin was reading the same kind of silence I had once feared, and though nothing between us was certain anymore, I knew this much: something special had happened, not a secret to be buried, but a truth to be lived with grace. Armin stayed longer than usual that afternoon. The golden light that once felt warm began to fade into a softer hue, wrapping the room in quiet melancholy. The air between us was still thick with what hadn't been said. That he had placed the poetry book on the coffee table, open to a page he said reminded him of me. The lines spoke of two souls circling each other like stars, close enough to feel the pull, afraid to collide. I read them twice, though I understood their meaning long before I finished. "You always bring words that make silence louder," I said, attempting to sound light. "Maybe silence is the only honest thing left between us," Armin replied. His voice was calm, but there was a tremor beneath it, the kind that only someone who listens too closely can hear. That I didn't answer. I couldn't. The truth was simple yet unbearable, he was right. Silence had become our language, a place where we said everything we were afraid to speak aloud. That I poured us another cup of tea, though neither of us really wanted it. My hands shook slightly as I set the cup before him. You're nervous, he observed. That I met his eyes. And you're too observant. He smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting in that quiet way that always made my chest tighten. Maybe I just see what others overlook. The mention of others was a shadow that passed between us. Samir's name didn't need to be spoken, his absence filled the room as clearly as his presence once had. For years, I had believed loyalty meant silence, that not saying what I felt would protect what I had. But lately, silence had begun to feel like deceit. Armin, I began, hesitating, do you ever think we crossed a line? He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. Every time I come here, he said softly. And every time, I tell myself I won't. But then you open the door, and I forget what I promised myself. The confession was gentle, almost a whisper, but it hit me with the weight of thunder. My breath caught in my throat. That I looked away, my eyes falling on the framed photograph on the wall, Samir and I at the beach, smiling, pretending the wind wasn't pulling us in different directions. It was from a time when everything between us had been easy, when love didn't need translation. I don't want to hurt him, I said quietly, and I don't want to be the reason you do, Armin replied. But you can't keep pretending that this, he gestured between us, doesn't mean something. The honesty in his voice broke something in me. For months, I had kept my emotions locked away, labeling them as harmless affection, the kind that friendship forgives. But standing here, I knew better. The boundaries I'd drawn were already blurred. I don't know what to do, I admitted. That he looked at me with such tenderness that it frightened me. You don't have to decide today, he said. Just, be honest. With yourself first. The room felt smaller then, as though the walls had leaned in to listen. Outside, the light had faded completely, the city lights flickered through the curtains, scattering shadows across the floor. Armin stood and walked toward the bookshelf, tracing his fingers along the spines of old novels. You keep so many stories here, he said softly. But the one you're living seems to hurt the most. I rose too, unsure of what to say. Maybe that's the cost of wanting something that isn't yours to have. He turned toward me, eyes dark and steady. Or maybe it's the cost of denying what's already yours. For a moment, neither of us moved. The tension wasn't just emotional now, it was moral, spiritual, the kind that forces you to see yourself without excuses. I could feel my pulse racing, not from desire, but from the realization that I was standing at a threshold. I think I should go, he finally said. That I nodded, though part of me wanted him to stay, to finish whatever this moment had started. But perhaps leaving was the most honest thing either of us could do. That he picked up the book, closed it gently, and placed it in my hands. Keep it, he said. Maybe you'll find the ending I couldn't write. When the door shut behind him, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, echoing with everything we hadn't said. That I sat back on the sofa, the book still warm from his touch, and wondered which would be harder, to forget him, or to face the truth that forgetting him was no longer possible.